World War II was an unfortunate period in history, as it led to millions of casualties across the globe. Besides having a disastrous effect on mankind, the war also did not fail to harm ecological life. However, it was not only the aerial and marine warfare that made the war such a memorably devastating event in our history. On August 6, 1945, one fateful event had completely changed World War II. The United States dropped the world's first atomic bombs, uncovering not only the weapon's initial impact, but also spreading a widespread fear of their catastrophic long-term effects. The bombings were to be used as a form of intimidation, but they came without warning, without testing prior to the actual bombings, and they were knowingly used on a residential area. After the bombings, only about 8% of the buildings around the area were still able to be used. About 13 square miles were left in ruins for the explosion. Over 200,000 people were killed as a result of the bombings. However, humans were not the only victims. Both humans and wildlife suffered from the disaster, as fundamental systems were disrupted by the sudden catastrophe. The moment the bombs fell onto the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, plant and animal life in the area was instantly killed. The bomb's impacts diffused outward towards the more rural and open-landed areas of the cities, wiping out any natural habitats in the region. Besides the actual bombings itself killing off natural life, debris and radioactive material that was sent into the air also disrupted otherwise naturally occurring cycles. For instance, because of the pollution caused by the two explosions, water cycles were greatly disrupted. Debris and radioactive material contaminated waters, making it dangerous for consumption by plants, animals, and even humans. This shortage of clean, consumable water caused disruptions in environments, making it harder for organisms to survive. Furthermore, the contamination of water with such radioactive material resulted in the occurrence of acid rain, which directly impacted any organisms in the area, as such rain was toxic for consumption. There was a disturbance in the carbon cycle from the original blast, along with a decrease in animal and plant life. The explosion and resulting large fires from the combustion of the atomic bombs consumed much of the oxygen in the air, converting it into carbon dioxide. With a significant decrease in plant life, there was less photosynthesis taking place, preventing the replenishment of oxygen in the atmosphere. However, the decrease in animal life also prohibited an increase of carbon dioxide from being released into the air through the process of respiration. Smoke from both explosions trapped carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for a relatively long period of time. In essence, air quality was significantly worsened with the sheer amount of debris and radioactive material sent into the air from the explosion. The blast eroded the earth, sending dirt and dust into the atmosphere. While the blast ravaged the land, decomposers found in the earth were killed off in the heat and radiation, preventing proper decomposition of the dead plants and animals. The remains of the bodies caused an increase of ammonium found in the earth. Although in a normal situation, a plentiful amount of ammonium would be beneficial to an environment, this was not the case. Without the proper bacteria present to perform denitrification and nitrogen fixation, the amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere, or the free nitrogen bank, remained unchanged by the environment below. Not enough of the nitrogen in the air was being converted into nitrates by nitrifying bacteria, and without plants to use the nitrogen either, there was a large amount of ammonium in the soil. This meant that the rest of the nitrogen cycle was practically at a standstill. This imbalance in plant and animal life caused by the destruction of essential cycles, such as the water cycle, greatly disrupted the food systems between predators and prey of the surrounding area. The death of both producers and consumers interrupted many food chains. As plants, common types of producers in a food chain, would absorb acidic or even contaminated water, such faulty nutrients would disrupt their equilibriums, causing them to die. Because of such a decrease in the availability of plant life, herbivores that otherwise solely depended on producers for energy were not able to survive, as they had no source of food. Without such autotrophs like plants, herbivores would have little food to eat, causing them to starve to death. However, this was not the only reason behind the depopulation of consumers such as herbivores, as radioactive wastes themselves would have taken a huge toll on the survivability of organisms in general. With the herbivores dying out, both omnivores and carnivores lost vital food sources as well. The acidic rain and wildfires destroyed producers of the lowest trophic levels, thereby affecting heterotrophs in the trophic levels above. Overall, the inhospitable land drove out indigenous animal and plant species, ruining entire food webs. With a combined decrease in plant and animal life, along with residual radiation, toxic rain, and air pollution, survival was only made more of a challenge. Finally, symbiotic relationships were greatly disrupted by the aftereffects of the bombings. With the disruption of basic habitats and the elimination of various organisms of various trophic levels, there was no real system of coexistence amongst the plants and animals of the area. Therefore, symbiotic relationships were much out of the question. The probability of the presence of symbiotic relationships was very slim, and mutualistic relationships were near impossible to have existed at the time. Commensalistic and parasitic relationships was still probable, however, since organisms were trying to survive to the best of their abilities, even if it meant depending on other organisms for a chance to live. However, again, there were not many available hosts in the area, so even the chances of commensalistic or parasitic relationships was relatively unlikely. While the average person is only exposed to an average of 0.1 rad of radiation each year, during the bombing of Hiroshima, people 1,025 meters away were exposed to doses of 400 rad, and people 925 meters away were exposed to 700 rad, thousands of times the average amount. Anyone without the proper protection was greatly affected by the radiation, and 20% of the deaths are a result of the effect. There was also residual radiation in the earth. Anyone who wasn't affected but entered the area was also exposed to the radiation. The air pollution and radioactive wastes in the air caused black rain to fall in other areas away from the blast radius, resulting in a considerable amount of residual radioactivity in those areas, along with poisoning the earth and the people. The delayed effects of radiation were the result of three culprits: the burns from the flames, the injuries from the blasts, and from radiation itself. The radiation increased the damage from the burns and injuries. The effects of the radiation were divided into two categories: acute sickness and long-term illness, depending on when the problems developed. Acute sickness occurred during the same year, all the way to December. Symptoms included digestive problems, blood problems, nervous problems, and inflammation problems. The people who survived from acute sickness seemed to be fine at first, but became ravaged with keloid, cataracts, and various cancers. Cases of malignant tumors have still generally been higher than normal in the area, especially leukemia. A genetic mutation is a change in the DNA sequence, which can happen in two ways. Mutations can occur during fertilization from one of the gametes, or they can be inherited from a parent. The two main types of mutations are point mutations and frameshift mutations, the latter of the two being considerably and on. The majority of mutations occurring from radiation during the bombings were from neutron and gamma rays, which most commonly results in a deletion mutation, an example of a frameshift mutation. This would greatly affect the victims from the bombings who weren't killed in the initial blast. A change of this degree can cause the patient to develop cancerous cells. The uncontrollable cell division from the mutations also has long-lasting effects throughout the generations. The most common cancer that resulted from mutations from the radiation was leukemia. Leukemia is a type of cancer when blood-forming cells in the bone marrow are defected, unable to create healthy cells. The cancerous cells can spread throughout the body through the bloodstream, able to infect just about every organ. When symptoms have been noticed in the body, complete blood counts and bone marrow examinations can be conducted to determine whether or not someone has leukemia. CT scans, blood chemistry tests, RAs, MRIs, and ultrasound can be used to determine the extent of damage done to the entire body. Environmental factors can contribute to the development of leukemia, including radiation and other carcinogens, which were present in Japan from the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A trend of leukemia in family ancestry has been observed, and anyone with chromosomal irregularities and other genetic diseases have a greater risk of developing leukemia. A regimen of multiple chemotherapy drugs are used throughout all stages of cancer. Radiation therapy may also be given. High-risk patients, generally in stages 3 and 4, can be given bone marrow transplants. People with leukemia will easily bruise and bleed excessively. When leukemia affects white blood cells, the immune system will not work as efficiently, and the body will become more susceptible to deadly diseases such as opportunistic diseases. Leukemia is a harmful and deadly cancer, and due to the bombings during World War II, the rate of cancer was at a high point. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both incomprehensible disasters, responsible for the hundreds of thousands of deaths, destruction of fragile ecosystems, and sadness that transcends time. The bombs were dropped before the full realization of the consequences, just in an attempt to intimidate. Was it worth it? Definitely not. Lingering radiation and genetic mutations are still major issues. Interrupting systems such as water cycle, carbon cycle, and the relationship between plants and animals are things that take a long time to repair. Such unfathomable and worthless violence brought upon the Japanese is an event that will haunt the lives of everyone involved for years to come.